Okay, so I'm welcoming Jaimie Johnson to the podcast. And once again, this is a situation. I actually talked to her for the first time about 10 minutes ago when I was a half an hour late for this podcast, which is fine. It's totally fine. We figured it
Yeah, we
out.
got a good chuckle to start us off.
Yeah. And I mean, and I think this is the second time we've had it scheduled because the first time I had internet issues and we couldn't connect that time either. So I'm doing really well. So welcome to the podcast, Jaimie. We're going to kind of get to know each other today and learn a little bit about each other. I am so intrigued by your story. You have one of those stories that as soon as people hear what you've been through, their whole heart just crumbles into a million pieces because people can imagine what you've been through. And it is, I went on a good stalking tour of your Facebook to watch kind of the growth that happened from your experience. So, wow, you have really made some lemonade here out of these women's life, which it's great to see people do that. So tell people first of all before you get into like your story, but tell people a little bit about yourself, like where you're from and what it is that you do for a career.
Yeah, so like you said, I'm Jaimie Johnson. I live in Fairfield, so south of where you are, but in Iowa. And I actually grew up there. I moved back and never thought I would stick around, but now I've been there for 10 years. So it's one of those things that you never quite know where life is going to take you, but I really love the small town life and just being able to be outside and all that stuff. So my winter heart is like ready for the summer to actually be here. So, because that's like my favorite thing is to like be outside, like kayaking, hiking, playing with my dog. I'm a crazy dog mom. That's definitely one of my things. If you stalked my social media, you've probably seen that.
Yeah.
My dog has skin allergies, so she wears t-shirts every day, and I kind of forget about it. But then we go out in public, and I get reminded that I'm the crazy dog mom whose dog wears clothes every day. So yeah, so that's a little bit about me. I'm not married and I don't have kids, so that definitely helps me embrace the dog mom vibe because
Yeah.
we are together all the time. I worked in the corporate world for a company in Fairfield for the last 10 years, and just a few months ago I took the leap to full-time entrepreneurship. So I moved out of my corporate role, and now I am full-time doing coaching. So I mainly coach people around grief and resilience. And my business is really built around helping people move through hard experiences. And sometimes that looks like actually losing someone, but it can also look like going through a divorce or a job loss or a lot of different things that happen in our lives that kind of leave us lost, not
Yeah.
sure what comes next.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I'm like so grateful to be like doing that full time now.
Well, that's amazing. And I think you made a really good point that, we grieve things, the loss of things, the idea of the loss of things, like an
Mhm.
idea or a dream that we have when something is lost, especially if it's taken from us, or COVID could be an example of that for people. There's certainly a grieving that happened for a lot of people that lost things like wedding plans, or big events or
Yeah.
something that they had going on. Um, and you don't find people that find themselves in the realm of grief coaching in any way without having been through something. Do you want to talk about that now, like what kind of started this whole journey for you?
Yeah, I can definitely share. So yeah, you're right. Most people are like, how did you get into that? And they always know there's a story behind it, right? Because
Exactly.
people don't usually tend to lean in that direction unless something has changed them. So for me, I unfortunately have experienced like a lot of grief and loss throughout my life. But just about 7 years ago, my fiance passed away very suddenly. He left for work one afternoon and like didn't come back home. So um, it was a very like shocking experience. And here I was 25, like I had graduated college, I got the job, I found the person, like we were getting ready to get married, like, I kind of thought everything was lining up. And as a perfectionist, that was like exactly what I wanted, right? Like, let's
Right.
check the boxes, let's keep going. And so when he died, I just like I woke up the next day and I had no idea what my life looked like anymore. I just like, you know, it wasn't just losing him, but I like lost myself and my vision for the future and all of the things that come along with that. And I wasn't, even though I had experienced grief, there was no way that I could have been prepared for that type
Right.
of experience. And I also struggled a lot because at like being a widow at 25, like most people around me couldn't relate to what I was going through.
I bet not.
Um,
Yeah.
you know, I mean, it was like the widows I knew were like my grandma or like older people who had lived a full life. And so to have had that life taken away before it even started, like just added to that level of grief that I experienced. And so for me, it was really hard at first to like even talk about it. Like I just kind of had to practice surviving in that moment.
And were you
And
working
so,
full time then? So you would have been at the job that you're at now,
yeah, so I was working
or
full
you were at,
time at
yeah.
the job that I just left. Yeah,
Yeah.
so I was with them for 10 years. So I was working full time doing marketing and design work. And honestly, like I'm so grateful for that job because well, first off, like I had a community of people around me who like
Sure.
loved me and, you know, saw that I was hurting, even if they didn't know how to help, like, you know, were still supportive. And so I was so grateful because for the last few years, that job became kind of like my steady point.
Sure. Yeah,
I
that makes
knew
sense.
that like I knew I had to wake up every morning and go to work and like do the things that didn't necessarily require me to like face off with grief and vulnerability and like pain every day. So I was so grateful to like have that space to actually show up and like feel a little bit more in control of my life as I was
How
going
does
through that.
it how does it work in coaching other people through grief? Because, you know, I've never lost anybody that close to me. But I've certainly experienced grief and loss in my life. And, you know, the grief process and like and the feeling of loss, never, that feeling of loss doesn't really go away. It changes, but it can catch
Mhm.
you. You can be triggered at the weirdest times, you know, a smell, or, you know, looking at a color or a picture, or even just like walking outside and having deja vu of something, you know, just like a feeling that comes back. How, like, do those things come up for you? Is it hard to work through for you? Does it, you know, I'm just trying to imagine, you know, reliving that in other
Yeah.
people's experiences. Is that part of your healing process? Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, it definitely has been a part of my healing process. So, you know, after I got through, like, it really took like a year or two before I could even like feel steady enough to be present in my life and figuring out what was next. But so I've been coaching on the side for the last 3 years, more as like a hobby, like a way to, as you said earlier, make lemonade out of this situation. And, but it was definitely a challenge for me as I started coaching because I would have conversations with people that would bring up things that I hadn't healed yet. And so it would like taking a flashlight and being like, okay, like here's an area that you need to look at still. And I can't say that it doesn't still happen, right? Like grief is always there. And so sometimes there are those moments, but thankfully, like by showing up and doing this work for myself, I've been able to move past a lot of those things and really more like it's more of an idea of like embodying my grief. So I would like accept that it's there and I know that it's always going to be there. And when those moments happen, like instead of being frustrated or annoyed by them, like at this point, I actually sometimes feel a little bit honored that they're happening because they aren't a part of my day-to-day life as much as they used to be.
Yeah, yeah, that would make sense. And I suppose there's a part of you that, you know, if that grief ever went away, that there'd be a level of guilt then that would replace it on like, well, what does that mean? You know, and
Yeah.
you know, you hear mothers talk about losing children, or people losing spouses, siblings, or whatever, you know, somebody super close to you, and, you know, years and years later, it's always, you know, people will describe it as a missing piece or whatever. But I love that you said embracing that grief, because it almost means like, well, yes, of course I miss this person, and of course I still have grief around them. And yeah, that's really interesting. How did you, so, I mean, you're working as in marketing and graphic design, a far cry from from being, although as an entrepreneur, you get to be your own marketing team. So yay for having those skills, right? But how did you decide? Was it a matter of wanting to help other people, or knowing that people helped you and wanting to, what made you decide I want to look into coaching? Because you're certified. I mean, you're not somebody that just like was like, oh, I'm going to give her advice and turn that into a coaching program.
Yeah, no, I definitely have gone through the last 3 years have been a pretty extensive practice of becoming certified and choosing this path. And so for me, I've always wanted to be an entrepreneur. So since I was a little kid, I actually remember like when that was like a spelling word when I was a kid, and I was like, ooh, what is this? What does this mean? Like, I remember that like exciting feeling. And so I always knew that I wanted to do that. And I was kind of at the like before my fiance died, I was at the point where I was a little bit ready to like start exploring what was next for me. And so like as I was healing through all of that, I knew that there was something that I wanted to do with this message. And I actually always thought it would be like more of like a product-based business. I was working in marketing, but I actually have a degree in industrial design, which is like product development. And so I always thought I would like sell something. And so when I started hearing about coaching, it like I kept hearing about it from all different areas. Like people just kept talking about coaching to me, and I was like, what is this? Like maybe I need to explore this a little bit further. And then I had gone through a little bit of my own coaching and personal development experience. And so finally, I was like, okay, if I'm supposed to do this, like God, universe, like show me what I'm supposed to do. And a couple days later, a friend of mine shared about this company that teaches, it like focuses on teaching women how to become like coaches and run their own businesses. And I was like, okay, I guess I asked for a sign and here it is. So so that was kind of my like beginning plunge, and it's all just kind of unfolded from there.
Yeah, and so you've done a lot of things with your career. I was looking, you do a lot of writing and speaking as well. What types of things are you? I mean, obviously through your coaching and through your experience, you kind of share that with others and help them through their own experiences. What types of things are you writing and speaking about that give people that kind of introduce people to what you do?
Yeah, I think the thing that I've really learned as I've gone through this experience is that we, as a society as a whole, need to feel more comfortable talking about grief and other hard experiences, because it's just too easy. Like I lost friends because they just didn't know what to say. And,
Yeah.
there were too many times that like people maybe said things that like didn't feel good also because they weren't sure how to like approach it. And so one of my big missions has been talking, first I'm just talking about grief and like letting people see my story and see my experience, but also helping people learn how to like have those conversations, and not just about grief, but like I just think there's so much power in talking about all of the hard things in our life and not pretending like we just all have it together and everything's perfect, because like it just doesn't help anyone. We all then go home and feel really crappy about our lives because we're only seeing the glamour highlights from the world.
Well, and I feel like there's kind of two extremes in people with, especially with think hard things, mental illness, dealing with grief, dealing with like big feelings. Basically, there's kind of two schools of thought. It's either pretend like everything's fine and never talk about it. This is, we never talk about Aunt Gertrude that was nuts in the closet. We don't ever talk about that. Or we don't talk about our own mental illness. We don't talk about our own grief, depression, anxiety, whatever. Or we end up talking about it so much that it becomes like a badge of honor, but then there's really no action to get to the other side of it. And so it's just something we talk about. And I kind of feel like I'm in the middle of the generations of, the younger generation, people younger than me are, it's something they're becoming very comfortable with talking about, which is great. I think that's wonderful. The generation over me is like, everybody be quiet. No, we don't talk about that time we lost our mind. We don't talk about that we're still crying every night over some loss or over some stress or depression. And then, I definitely feel in the middle. Is that what you help people with, is like finding that middle ground?
Yeah, that's one of the big things that I help people with a lot. And also finding like the right spaces to talk about things at the right times. So I'm not a big proponent of like going on Facebook and just like, downloading your feelings in that moment, because I just know too often people leave and don't feel good about that later. But as I work with clients, like it's often about finding like the right space, right? So if you're feeling that, like maybe in that case, you need to give your friend a call and say, I just need to vent. Like, can you just listen to me? And then being able to like take that maybe a week or a month or however long from now, and then share that experience after you've healed and like processed through it, instead of just it being like out into the space before you've actually had a chance to work through it yourself.
Yeah, I think
So
maybe that's part of it that we miss is, yeah, we can talk about the stuff, but where, and not that there's necessarily, I mean, maybe Facebook is the place that you want to go download your and dump your your feelings, your diary, your journal, and
mhm.
maybe that does help you. But if it doesn't, then where is the right space, and how do you find that? Like you said, you 25, living as a widow. Who do you talk to about that at that age? That
Yeah.
and no children to back you. A lot of times, younger widows have small kids, so they've got the kids to kind of pull it back
Yeah.
up.
Been busy and like gotta keep moving. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And you said in your bio that that it was just messy. The healing process was
Yeah.
messy, and I love that you said that, because I'm like, man, I can relate to that.
Yeah. It's so messy. And I think life in general is so messy, but we don't want it. We don't want to admit that it's messy. So we're
Yeah,
like, let's just pretend like it's all tidy and clean. And so really a lot of what I like do with clients is helping them embrace the chaos, like embrace the mess and learn to be fine with not having control over everything that they're
yeah,
doing in their life.
yeah.
Uh, because that's really been a huge lesson for me too, is realizing like I thought I had control of my life until that happened. And then I was like, wow, I have no control over anything in my life. So, it's like kind of just learning to like roll with it a little bit
Did,
in those situations.
did your fiance and you have did you have a wedding date planned and all of that ready to go, or?
We were at the beginning part of that. So we had like gone ring shopping together. We had like we were starting the whole process. But that's actually like in a it seems like a small thing in the scheme of it, but I also missed out on like even those things, like being able to like start planning the wedding and start telling people about it and getting excited about those things, because we hadn't quite made it there yet.
Yeah, well,
And so
my thought on that was, at 25, how many times do people ask you? They stop asking me now, but I up until 25, 30, 35 people, where do you see yourself in 5 years? So
yeah.
I was just thinking, like, how many times you say when you're out of college, just out of college, where do you see yourself in 5 years? Oh, I
Mhm.
just got engaged. So, in 5 years, what those plans looked like. And here, you're over 5 years out of that experience. And it's just do you find yourself comparing a lot to what could have been, or is that?
Yeah, that was definitely something that I've had to work through over time. And I feel like I do a pretty good job of not comparing now, but it was very hard. And like, I was also at the phase in my life where all of my friends were getting married,
Oh,
and, everyone else around me was like moving in the same direction. And so I think like the year after my fiance died, or like the year or two after, I was in like a bridesmaid weddings, and it was like, I wanted to be there and like support them and like celebrate the fact that they were getting married, but it was also like some of the most difficult days of my grief journey, actually like showing up and like helping someone else celebrate the things that like I didn't get to have.
yeah, no kidding.
So
That's just it's well, and it's interesting that I like I said, I'm just so impressed that you've been able to take that and turn it into something. Your business is called Finding Aurora, and I
yes.
think that is such a beautiful phrase. But I would love to know what inspired that. I'm assuming it had something to do with all of this.
Yeah, yeah. It was actually it's like it was kind of one of those divine timing moments when it all came together. One of the things that I realized, like a kind of a turning point moment for me in my grief journey, was a moment that I realized that I had been trying my hardest to become, like, to go back to the person that I used to be, like to be that like bubbly, happy, fun person that I used to be. And it was a little bit of an existential crisis for me when I realized that like I couldn't ever be her again. Like she didn't know how to hold this level of grief and empathy and all of the things that like I knew now. And so it like really kind of came down to this idea that like I needed to learn to embrace like that light side of who I was trying to go back to, and also like this darkness and like the heavy part that was now a part of my life. And I had this moment of like I was talking to a friend, and she actually mentioned Aurora as in like the Disney princess, like Sleeping Beauty. But it just clicked for me, and I was like, wow, like the Aurora is beautiful because of the light and the darkness. And if you don't have one or the other, then it's just like a plain night or like plain sunshine. And so that's kind of where the name came from, of really like learning to embrace both of those things with like equal weight instead of trying to only live in one or the other.
Yeah, yeah, that is really awesome. I wouldn't have gone that way with it, but I think that's beautiful, and it rolls off your tongue very nicely. And I get your logo a lot more now with it almost looks like an eclipse, I guess
Yeah,
I
yeah,
would
a
I
little
would
bit of
say.
that, like the light coming out of that
Yeah,
darkness.
which is similar, you wouldn't have that without both the light and the dark either. And I think that's probably true of a lot of things in life. But when you're talking about grief, it's really pointed that they're like, you, just, man, you just have to embrace it in order to continue to move on from it, I suppose. What kinds of things are you, so it must have felt like life kind of paused for a while. And I'm sure, in my friends that have gone through similar things, never knowing when to start over, when it's okay to have your life again, because now that it's different. Um, I was reading about some medieval ancient times of how people grieved. And if a woman lost her husband, she was expected to basically live in grief under a black veil or something in some part of the world. I don't remember, for an extreme amount of time. And they said, for this many years you will be in grieving. And I remember thinking, well, it was nice if they put boundaries around it for her. But how awful for people to feel that way. So now that you're moving forward, do you find yourself able to like look forward to things, and is that another thing that you're trying to help your clients get to?
Yeah, absolutely. And everyone has that at their own pace. So like you said, like, yeah, I mean, it's kind of nice, like the example you gave, that they set some time aside, but at the same time, we all go at our own pace. And so with my clients, it's really about creating a unique experience for them, because it doesn't like, it wouldn't be helpful for me to be like, okay, this is our timeline, this is what we're talking about when because it's different for everyone in every
So 4
situation.
years and 3 months to get your grooving done, and then we'll move on to the next chapter.
Yeah, exactly. And so, yeah, for me, it took a long time to really feel like, to really like understand that like I could be both happy and grieving at the same time. I think we as humans sometimes have a hard time holding like conflicting emotions at the same time. And so so it's like we think like, oh, well, if I'm supposed to be sad, then I can't have happy moments either. And so it took a lot of just showing up and practicing that, like to actually embrace that. And as much as I'd like to say now, like, I'm great, I can like do all of this myself, like my coach actually just reminded me this last week. She's like, Jaimie, you don't have to defend your joy. Like, I still find myself sometimes wanting to like explain to people why I deserve to be happy now, because it's taken a lot to like let myself be happy again.
Yeah, well, I think that's a great point, because and the reason I think, I mean, we've all heard somebody judge somebody else for moving on too quickly, whether it be like moving on to another romantic partner or, just moving on with life. Like, well, gosh, didn't so-and-so just die like a year ago? And they're already, people are very judgmental about that. And I think, I think that we shouldn't live in a place where we pretend they're not, because I have heard it.
Yeah,
I've
I've heard it from clients. I've experienced it with friends, and I've also experienced it myself. Like everyone wants to have an opinion about those things, but I also find that oftentimes those people they want to have an opinion, but they also don't want to take the time to actually understand.
Right. Yeah. I mean, we're getting reminded of that right now with this Meghan Markle interview, and I don't mean to throw that pile of thing in your face, but people are very judgmental about that situation. I just saw somebody post on social media today that said, well, these people are rich and they have money. How dare she talk about being depressed? And I'm like,
yeah, you're like, those things don't exclude her from feeling those feelings.
Thank you. I'm glad you agree, because I really just threw that out of left field into your ballpark.
Yeah.
But I'm like, so she doesn't, well, I guess money does buy antidepressants. So
yeah, well, if that fixed everything though, then the rich people would have no problems, and we know that's not.
Well, and your point is so it's so important. Like you without taking the time to understand, and how could you truly understand where somebody's come from if you can't stand in their shoes? Or I mean, empathy can only really go so far in some situations. If you've never been there, then how do you really know?
Yeah, and one thing with grief too, I find like it's uncomfortable, right? Like the conversation about grief is uncomfortable. Being with someone who's going through grief is uncomfortable. Obviously, going through grief on your own is uncomfortable as well. But a lot of times, like, it always sticks in my mind, like one of our cliche things, right, is like, I can't even imagine how you feel. But ultimately, like, we don't want to imagine how they feel, because it's not like most people could actually, if they stopped and thought about it, could imagine what it's like for their partner to leave and not come back. But that's a very uncomfortable experience and feeling. And so we often just don't want to. And I don't blame you, right? Like I wouldn't wish that kind of thing on like my worst enemy. Thankfully I don't have that many enemies, but I still wouldn't wish it on them. But I think it's like, it speaks to like our bigger cultural different like way that we approach it though, of like, let's just kind of talk about it as little as we have to and like not really feel it. And it's easier to like pass those judgments or think you know what's going on than it is to actually like sit down and listen.
Is there anything, and you've probably been asked this before, and maybe there's no good answer, I don't know, but is there any advice that you could give to people that are next to somebody going through something really hard, some sort of high level of grief, that they, any advice that you could give people on helping them? Because a lot of times you said, you lost friendships because of it. And a lot of times it's truly just because it's awkward and people don't know what to do. They don't know what to do. They don't know what to say. They don't know if they should reach out, if they should say, if they've never been through it. What do you have anything that you're like, this is the one thing you could, or a few things you could try to do?
Yeah, I think it's a really great question. And when I get this question, I always wish I could just be like, XYZ, these are the things you need to do. But ultimately, I think it like comes down to just like showing up is really a big part of it. And sometimes even just saying like, I don't know what to say, but I'm here for you can actually resonate and feel so much better than trying to say something like, it's all happening for a reason, or you'll meet someone else. Like all those kind of like, there's too many times that like we say things that like are good intentions, but they don't land well for the person who's feeling it. So I always advise like, just say like, I'm here for you. Like, and even sometimes it's just sitting there, like not even saying anything, just letting them know that like, I'm here.
Yeah. I think that's a good point. I think the thing people always say that I think is, I've tried really hard to stop saying is, let me know if you need anything, like putting the ball in the griever's court.
Yeah. And especially because when you are grieving, like literally like you might have the energy to like get out of bed, maybe shower, like your brain is not really in a place to actually like ask for what you need in those moments. I heard someone give a great example a couple weeks ago of like, instead of someone saying like, let me know if you need anything, instead you could say like, what groceries do you need? I'll bring them over. Like, or like being more specific about like how you can help versus like asking them to like tell you how you
Yeah.
can help.
What do you want the future to look like for you, and continuing to like evolve this journey of making the lemonade for what it's worth? I kind of like cringe in my own throat when I say it, because I hate to continue that conversation of, oh, everything happens for a reason. Because you don't, it's not that you wouldn't go back if you could, but what does moving forward, like what are your dreams now that you look forward to, being able to provide for people?
Yeah, that's a great question. And you're right. Like I think thankfully for me, like I've been able to like make this lemonade, but I also don't like there's not an expectation, right, that people have to do that. And so I think for me, like I feel really honored to be doing this work. And so I'm excited to be building out, like I work one-on-one with some clients now, and I eventually want to expand that to offer some different like training or group programs so that I can expand this work. And then I'm really excited to be, speaking at the Vulnerably You conference this month. That's one of my first like big speaking events. And so I'm excited that, I'm hoping that is just the beginning, and I'll get to go and share this message and spread that word also, so that
Yeah.
just to help, like really that's the biggest part of it, is like, I just want to help people like feel happy, like not even feel happy, but like feel like they get to choose their path here.
Yeah.
Instead of,
Well, and a lot of times we do have to hear somebody's story, and it's like, well, shoot, if she could do that, I can get through this. If she could get through that, I can get through this. And and we, by the way, we love when we have the opportunity to give people some of their first stages. Like that's part of our mission and part of what we want to do, because it's hard to find those first places to share your story and to share your message. But I do know, having so many friends that have dealt with profound grief, is what I would call, versus what I've been through, is that it's those it's the days after the event is over, long over, after the memorials and the celebrations of and all of the gathering is all over, and when life is supposed to be quote unquote back to normal again, that people really find themselves needing help. And I don't know how you would be helped by somebody that couldn't, I mean, maybe somebody that's, got a lot of psychology, and understanding of how the brain works, but just, I think the thing that feels the best about that, about getting help, is people that can say, "I know exactly how you feel," and they mean it. They
yeah.
get, like,
Yeah, and that what you just described is really like the sweet spot for me working with clients. Is I'm typically not the person that gets called like the week after they lose someone, because it does take some time to like even come to terms with the fact that it happened, and to like work through that. And so yeah, where I actually really get to like shine with my clients is when they are at that point that they're like, okay, like this has happened, but like, what do I do next? And like, how do I actually learn to like live with this and like become this new person that I have to be because of the situation that I've gone through? And so that's really where like I get to come in and help them. And you're right, like being able to know like what it felt like, even for me to like look back to be like, okay, where was I at like 2 years or 3 years, and like understand what those people are feeling, and also give them a little hope to say like, look, like I didn't believe that I could do this either, but now I've gotten to here. Is a really, yeah, it just really makes a big difference when people can relate to what you've gone through.
I think the other thing I would love to know, and I think I probably know the answer. You said you have a good community around you. Would you say that and I know not everyone does, and that's probably where a great coach would come in to be very
Mhm.
helpful. But would you say that How important was that as you're going through everything and healing out of the deep pit of despair that I'm sure you found yourself in? What did community do for you?
Yeah, I think finding a community for me was a huge turning point. And I think it was an interesting experience because like I said, I actually like ended up losing a lot of friends and like people I was close to in like those first couple of years because they just didn't know how to like show up for me. And I also couldn't show up for them. So, you know, they would
Yeah.
send invitations to go to things and things like that. And it was like I just couldn't do it. And so there was a point where it was really lonely because I had lost like the people who were there for me before. And thankfully, I have a very supportive family. And actually, my fiance's family is really amazing. They've kind of just adopted me as their extra daughter. So I'm very grateful for that. That's going to make me, of course, all the things we're talking about, that's going to be the thing that makes me tear up on our call.
Yeah, I
But
talked
yeah,
about all the hard things and you handle it like a champ. Come on. No, but well, it is amazing when somebody doesn't have to be your family and they choose to be. You know, that's a whole different that's just a different feeling that you could remind them of all the things they don't want to be reminded of and vice versa. So getting to like, embrace each other's grief is probably amazing.
yeah, absolutely. And then I think as I started doing my own like personal development work and like actually leaning a little bit more into like it really became like I kind of had to recreate like who I was going to be. And so that took a lot of work. And thankfully, going through that process also brought a lot of great new friends and a new support system into my life who understood where I had come from and also knew the new me. Like sometimes that's even hard still when I go and hang out with people that I haven't hung out with, you know, in the last few years or like see family that I haven't seen, like they're expecting me to be who I used to be. And that's just not who I am anymore. And so I think having like a community and support system has been a huge part of it. And that's one of the reasons why I coached also, because I know people need that person who can understand and listen to them. And even now, like my best friend, like she is constantly like reminding me of the things that I know, but like are still hard for me to believe. And so I really even today need that support system and reminder.
Do you have a hard time, or do your clients have a hard time with being grateful for the things that have come out of grief? Like, does that ever get weird?
It can get a little weird, especially when it feels like in conflict with the grief. So
Sure.
um, yeah, like sometimes like as I've started like dating again and like moving forward in my life, it can feel a little sticky to be like, I'm like choosing this new thing that makes me feel really happy, but like what does that mean for like my fiance and where it came from? And so it can get a little tricky, like
Yeah, I bet.
balancing those things out.
Because I'm sure there's a lot of things you have, a lot of people you know, and a lot of things that you do, obviously, an entire business now that wouldn't exist had your fiance not passed away. And so I was just thinking, man, what a conflict that must be in your brain of I'm super grateful to have all of these things that I have, but I wouldn't have them if like the worst thing in my life didn't happen. So therefore, should I not be grateful for it? Gratitude
Yeah.
must feel when you what triggered this thought in my head was when you were talking about being so different than you were before, just being a different person. And I was thinking, well, we all evolve and change a lot as we get older. And I know I was much different at 25 than I was at 32 and then that I am now. But I'm sure that change happened much quicker, a lot bigger drop. But then I thought, well, gosh, yeah, I one of the things I do 3 gratitudes every day, 3 things I'm thankful for. I put it on a little notepad every day, and I thought, man, gratitude must feel really different with that grief in the back of your head all the time. That must.
Yeah. And I definitely have had to do a lot of my own gratitude practices and things through that too, to start really allowing myself to have gratitude for those things
Yeah,
because
that's what I was
it
thinking.
felt,
Yeah.
yeah, like it felt really weird for a while. And actually when I started coaching, I started with the intention of being a grief coach, but I wasn't ready for that. Like as I like started doing it, I was like, oh, this is just a little too much. So I did marketing and branding coaching for a while. And then as I've, now I'm like able to like show up fully in that space, but really having that gratitude and like learning to embrace that part of it has been a huge part of that evolution as well. Because yeah, like a little bit of me was like, oh, like I can't talk about my fiance and this process all the time. Like I'm just like taking advantage of him to make money in my business. It's like those weird thoughts. And
Sure.
I know that sounds silly to say out loud,
No,
but
it really doesn't sound silly. I wouldn't have thought of it, but it doesn't sound silly at all. No, it's really interesting. I can't even imagine having that, where you're also having such a gift to give to people, the gift of understanding, the gift of true empathy and understanding how they feel in a situation and helping them grieve through it. But also like, yeah, am I oofda? Those big
yeah.
feelings.
So definitely when we talk about messiness, that there's a lot of like messy parts to that I've had to untangle, and honestly I'm still untangling them. I think people who are going through like immense grief, like there's always some other bit of it, I think, that you get to untangle, right? Like when I have a new client, I never go into the conversation saying, yeah, like in 6 months you're going to be completely healed of your grief and like fine, because that's just not the reality of how it works. And so
I mean, you can't just put that veil on their heads like they did in that.
yeah,
I read they put the veil on and they just take it off in it was like 6 years or something they were saying. I don't know. And it's only just kind of passing through my head. Who knows what I actually am remembering? But I'm like, no, there was a.
and maybe that's what I did wrong. The veil would have made everything easier.
Well, and people did walk around like dressed a certain way when they were in grieving. A woman in grieving, they walked around a certain way so other people would know. Oh, she's grieving. So she's crazy over there. Don't mind her. We dressed her that way so you wouldn't know. Do you think maybe sometimes it would have been good to have a neon sign over your head for people?
I honestly was just going to say that. I think sometimes like that would have been helpful, because especially like working in the corporate world, like it was so often that people would be like, oh, so you're married? Do you have kids? Like that's like the first question.
Oh.
And of course, like for me, that's like, and also like you're a stranger. This is the first question you're asking me. And I don't really want to tell you like the why, like why that's a problem.
Yeah, so you put the veil on and you say, no, not married, no kids. No, I'm just me and my dog.
Yeah. So that might have made it a little easier there for a while.
And that just goes to the point that we really never know what people are going through behind the scenes. I'm grateful for you that you didn't work in retail. That really would have been terrible, I feel.
Oh yeah. Oh. Yeah, constantly being faced with new people asking those questions, for sure.
Yeah. And I don't think it's to say that we can never have those small talk questions, but I have learned, especially interviewing people, I always say, if there's anything off limits, let me know, or, put it in the notes before we do the podcast, and I'll stick away from it. And that came from one time doing an interview with somebody and asking them about their husband. And she masked it very well, and then later said, I didn't tell you this, but we're going through a separation and it was really bad. And a lot of hurt and trauma for her happening at the time. And I thought, man, darn it. you just never know. And I don't think it's to say that you can't ask questions and have small talk with people, but it has challenged me to ask questions differently of people. Like I'll say, well, tell me what life's like at home for you. Like what does life outside of work look like for you? And then people can tell me about, their dog or their kids or their, crazy aunt that lives with them or whatever. I don't know why so many crazy aunts are coming up. I literally have 0 of those. So I've mentioned it twice.
Yeah. That's right. I think I probably am the crazy aunt. Like I that's one of my favorite parts of being an auntie. I get to spoil them and be a little crazy. So
yeah, how many nieces?
Just feeling my crazy aunt vibes.
Yeah, well, and I am one too. I don't have biological children. I have 2 stepkids, so it's kind of like a marriage between mom and aunting. And then I have a ton of nieces and nephews, and I think that my biggest badge is being the best aunt ever. How many nieces and nephews do you have?
I have 10 total.
Wow.
So
So we
lots
can
of
battle
them.
it out for best aunt.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that works. I'm all for that challenge. There's probably room for 2 winners too. So this will be a fun challenge.
Well, see, you've got 2 more kids than I've got. So if we voted, I would lose because those little
Mhm.
jerks are loyal. Um, although some of mine are becoming teenagers now. Are any of yours that age?
Yeah, my oldest nephew is going to graduate in a couple of months. So
Yeah.
yeah, I
So
have the whole range.
I'm not loving this part of them getting to be teenagers with their own
I
opinions.
know. I'm like, you can't be an adult yet.
Weird. It's so weird.
Yeah.
Well, I have really enjoyed talking to you, and it's been it it's all I always love a story that helps me in at your expense, which is not good, but but I always love a story that helps me understand, whatever you're going through, you can get through it. And
Mhm.
what I was going to say before was, well, gosh, if you can get through that, I can get through this, which I said previous. But it's not just so much of that. Sometimes it's just knowing that people are really resilient. We really are very resilient as human beings, and we can get through things. Can you tell us a little bit more before we go about what people will be able to take away from your session at Vulnerably You?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm super excited about it. So the theme for my talk at Vulnerably You is vulnerable authenticity. And one of the most powerful things that I've learned through this journey is that when we allow ourselves to be vulnerable and share our stories, it actually opens up a whole new world of people being able to be vulnerable with us and share their stories also. And like I said earlier, one of my like real like missions in life is to like teach people that it's okay to talk about these hard things. And so my talk is going to be focused on like really the benefits of showing up with like vulnerable authenticity and fully as yourself, and doing that in a safe and healthy way. So we had talked about earlier, right? Like we want to find the way that feels best for us. It doesn't have to look like showing up online and spilling your guts, and it also doesn't have to look like not sharing your story with anyone. And so my talk is really going to be focused on learning how to like have those conversations, whether you've experienced something like I have that is really difficult to talk about and very vulnerable, or you just want to bring more authenticity and vulnerability into your day-to-day life. I'll go through some tips and some things that I've experienced and learned to make sure that people are able to start incorporating that, because I think one of the things too I've learned is that we don't have to wait to start building resilience and vulnerability until something major happens to us.
Yeah.
We can start to learn those skills and to embrace them now. And hopefully you don't experience something like that, but we all know that life is going to give us curveballs. And so it's really about like starting to embrace those things now so that you're prepared when life gives you things that you're not expecting.
Yeah, well, and I mean, truly, grief is grief. I mean, when you're in it, your brain doesn't differentiate like that it could be worse. I
Mm-hmm.
think sometimes we think, well, I lost a job opportunity, or I lost a gig, or I lost a client, um, or something seemingly smaller. But in the moment, the loss really doesn't linger the same way. Hopefully,
Mm-hmm.
probably, but your brain really doesn't, I don't think, differentiate one grieving moment from the next. So
Yeah.
it's
No, yeah, we all experience it. And I think that's like an important part of it too, is like oftentimes we want to compare grief, and it's really not something that can be compared, right? Like even though I can understand what people are going through with grief more because of what I've gone through, like I couldn't ever go to someone and be like, well, you shouldn't be as sad as I was because it was just your parent that passed away or something. It's like everyone has their own experience with this. And so but I also like one time had someone talk to me for 20 minutes about how their cat died and how like they could understand what I was going through because their like cat died. And it's like that's still valid grief. Like it's still important for them to feel it, but that maybe wasn't the right situation to be sharing
Like
this
you're
story.
allowed to feel your grief, but maybe don't compare it.
Yeah, yeah. And that's where a lot of those vulnerable conversations and like showing up with authenticity matters, because we don't want to be sharing our story just to like compare or as like a badge, like you said earlier. It's more about how do we create connection and understanding and be able to like share more of it as a whole versus this is mine and that is yours kind of thing.
Yeah, that's so good. Well, I am excited to have you here and to have you sharing these things. I think everybody can relate, and I think it looks like I'm being a robot right now. I don't know if my connection got weird, but it's only weird to me, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah,
But
you look fine to me.
But I'm glad to have you here and sharing these things, because it's some of those things that we do kind of sweep under the rug and try not to talk about, or wonder, am I alone? Am I the only one feeling this way? And or why am I the only one feeling this way? And sometimes, especially with social media involved, when you're going through a really hard time, and then you watch the rest of the world just tick on around you, it's really good to have a reminder that there's somebody else in your boat too. So thank you for being a voice for us, and for being an awesome aunt and dog mom, because those things are really important. Even
It's very important.
Yeah,
I'm visiting a friend right now. My dog's staying with my parents, and I'm like struggling. I need those dog snuggles.
Oh, that's too funny. Well, thank you so much for all of your grace too on this scheduling. I'm glad we got this finally done. We're looking forward to seeing you in just 2 weeks.
Yeah, it's coming up so quickly. I can't wait.
It's going to be a lot of fun. We are so excited that this is actually, like, I don't feel like we're going to have to cancel.
Yes.
Our March 2020 conference.
It should be good.
Yeah, March 2020, we had to cancel it was the same week in March. So, everything shut down right about St. Patrick's Day. So we had about a week that we had to shut it down, and it turned out fine, but that's not fun. So as long as we get within a week, I think I'll feel really good about being able to pull it off and make it happen.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know you're taking lots of precautions and planning accordingly. So I think it will be perfect.
Also weird, but yeah. Totally doing that.
Yeah. Living in the mess. That's what it's about.
It is a mess. It is a mess. Well, thank you so much. We're going to go ahead and say goodbye to the podcast.